Hi, I'm Susan Swain, host of C-SPAN's Q&A, where we spend an hour with nonfiction writers and historians who add context to today's news. This week, a conversation with Rick Wartzman about his new book, Still Broke: Walmart's Remarkable Transformation and the Limits of Socially Conscious Capitalism. Given unparalleled access to Walmart executives, Wartzman traces the history of the Bentonville, Arkansas retail giant and its more recent efforts to transform itself. Wartzman uses this study of Walmart's relationship with its workers to raise larger questions about the nation's millions of minimum wage workers. Our conversation will begin in just a moment.
We come here to honor a man who shows that through hard work and vision and treating people right, many good things can happen. This visit is not about Sam Walton's wealth. He's earned his money, and that's his business. He's been generous with his fortune, and that is in the great tradition of America's commitment to this concept that I call 1,000 points of light. It's not about money. Visit's not even about philanthropy. This visit is about what is fundamentally good and right about our country. And it's about determination, it's about leadership, it's about decency.
That was President Bush 41 awarding the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. Rick Wartzman, your latest book, Still Broke, is about the evolution of the company that Sam Walton founded. Tell me about the project.
Yeah, this was a project about 3 years in the making. Pretty fast book for me, actually. I usually take longer, but super timely, and really wanted to get this one out there. What I really wanted to do was take a look at Walmart's changes to its labor policies, really its policies around how it invested in and treated its frontline workers, changes that have accelerated since really 2015, when the company introduced the first across-the-board increase in its starting wage in its history since Sam Walton founded the company in 1962. Followed the company for a long time, knew there were a lot of interesting things going on. They clearly really changed some practices in terms of how they treated their frontline workers, and I wanted to know what was going on, why they did it, and kind of what the results have been.
So why Walmart? There's a lot of national attention on two other major retailers, Amazon and Starbucks these days. Why Walmart?
Well, Walmart is still the biggest employer in the country by far. There are about 1.7 million U.S. workers now. So it actually has a much bigger frontline workforce than Amazon does, or certainly than Starbucks does. And totally get why there's attention around those other companies. But Walmart remains the biggest employer in the U.S. and the biggest company in the United States.
Can you supply a few other statistics besides the number of employees? How many stores does it have today? Estimate of annual revenues, what its market capitalization is, and what the trend has been over the past 10 years?
Yeah, the company has about 5,000 stores, I think, including its Sam's Club stores. And I don't actually know its current market cap off the top of my head.
But what has the trend been? Is it continuing to grow over the past decade, even if there have been challenges in the larger marketplace?
Yeah, the company has definitely continued to grow. First of all, it did extremely well during the pandemic. It saw huge increases in sales. It was a place a lot of people relied on. And although it, lags in online sales compared to Amazon, it has done a lot to, grow its online business.
So an important part of this project, and you alluded to this in your first answer, is really you. So tell me a little bit about the long coverage you've had of Walmart.
Yeah, I have, I guess, had something of a long, somewhat personal relationship with Walmart. So I was the business editor of the Los Angeles Times many years ago now, and helped lead a team in that role that won the Pulitzer Prize in 2004 for national reporting. Really, my colleagues, took a really deep look at Walmart and what we described as the high cost, really the high human cost in many ways of low prices. Right. So we know that Sam Walton, and it was interesting hearing that first clip. I don't disagree with anything that President Bush said about Sam Walton. I think there's just more to the story than that. But Sam Walton was a visionary, and he was able to bring, particularly to rural areas, smaller communities, stores that offered high quality goods, the kinds of goods that folks would often have to travel, pretty far in the car to go to a big department store to find. He brought them to their region, to their hometowns, and did it with, again, really low prices that they could afford, and was an incredible model, incredible growth, incredible success. But as our LA Times story showed, particularly over the years as the company grew, there were costs to that. Part of that low price formula was holding down wages for their frontline workers. They also, squeezed suppliers and, made it really, they were tough to bargain with. They often drove manufacturing overseas. So there were a lot of costs as well, kind of social costs and human costs that came with those low prices. Staying with
you, you also tell readers that in recent years you've been associated with the Drucker Institute. What does it do?
Yeah, so for the past 15 years, I've been at the Drucker Institute. We're a nonprofit social enterprise based at Claremont Graduate University, so just outside Los Angeles. And we do a number of things. One of the efforts I've been leading in recent years has been around a lifelong learning initiative, a lifelong learning platform. It's a digital platform called Bentonville. It's available through U.S. public libraries. And it's a way for people to discover and access the online classes and other learning opportunities they need, both to thrive at work and outside of work. And interestingly, especially given my background from the LA Times and in my last book before this one, The End of Loyalty, I had some, not so nice things to say about Walmart and its business model. And much to my surprise, Walmart ended up helping provide some of the seed funding that got this lifelong learning project off the ground.
So you acknowledge that some people will be a bit skeptical since you've received money from the Walmart Foundation about their treatment in the book. What's your response to that?
Yeah, look, I'm not naive. I was actually pretty surprised. I had been giving some book talks about the end of loyalty, and I had been approached by a couple of folks from Walmart, from the corporate foundation, who had heard me speak. Part of what I was talking about during my talk was how workers used to get a lot of on-the-job skills training, particularly frontline workers, and that part of the corporate social contract, if you will, had kind of unraveled along with many other things: job security, pay, health benefits, retirement security, and so on. Training, investments were not what they once were, 40, 50 years ago, again, particularly for frontline workers. Walmart has taken a real interest in this topic, and they've done a lot to invest in training. They heard me speak. They found out what I was working on at the Drucker Institute, and they, along with Google, actually became one of our first philanthropic funders to get the project off the ground.
So when
I was really surprised, given my history. They clearly knew who I was. But just to answer your question, I would say, look, it gave me a new kind of window into Walmart. I got to meet lots of people. And it actually kind of stirred my interest in doing this current book. What I told them was, hey, I need access if I'm going to tell this story. I do think you've done a bunch of things to change the way you treat your frontline workers. I'm not sure you've gotten your due. I want to tell that story. I'm also not going to pull any punches. I'm going to talk to all your critics. I'm actually friends with many of the kind of labor activists who go after you all the time. I'm going to talk to them as well. And I'm going to come to what I think is, a true portrait of where you are and why you've done what you've done.
Why do you think they said yes?
I'm really persuasive, I guess. I'm not, I think they said yes because they really do believe they have a good story to tell. And in many ways, it really is a good story to tell in the context of Walmart's own history, in the context of being in the retail business, where there are typically, very low paid workers. They have done quite a bit to make new investments in that workforce, to try and give people more opportunity. They're sincere about it. They've worked hard at it. And I think they, felt like they had a good story to tell. And in many ways they do. And in many ways, as the book says and the title says, they fall short.
Let's go back to the Walmart origin story with Sam Walton and put a little more color to it. When and why did he start the company?
Yeah, Sam Walton had always had just a nose for retail. He just had this incredible knack for understanding what people wanted to buy. There's some great stories of him, kind of pulling out whatever it was, sort of a pair of sandals and knowing they would be the hottest thing in town and buying loads of them and piling them up on the, sort of display table. And some of his workers thought he was nuts. These things will never sell. And they became the hot item around. So he had a real knack for it. He clearly had this vision, again, of bringing low-priced, high-quality goods to parts of America that didn't have outlets that would provide those things, and saw an opportunity there that few others did. Others questioned whether they would have the population base and the income to be able to support any kind of retail. And he obviously proved them wrong on that. And he was a visionary. He was a relentless worker. He loved to go to rivals' stores and see what was working there, literally sometimes getting down on his hands and knees and opening up the little cabinets to see what was in their inventory, underneath the, cash register, those kinds of things. And would really kind of take the best ideas from elsewhere, make them his own, and deploy them at Walmart.
You also write that he was an innovator. We have him to thank for self-service shopping with shopping carts.
Yep. Right. It used to be, you would go around and there would be kind of counter after counter, more the way maybe a, traditional department store, right? If you go into Macy's and there's someone at the perfume counter and then, someone, at a different counter to help you with some other kinds of items. And it was full of people and kind of specialists at each counter. And he changed that model and, had people go around and do this kind of quote unquote self-service. I mean, we just think of it as shopping now, but you grab a cart and go around and pull your own things off the shelf. It was a great way to actually save on labor and kind of helped revolutionize retail.
You described the 1970s as Walmart's miracle decade. How so?
They just started to grow like crazy. And it was a time, of course, when for those who are old enough to remember, the country was really hit hard by this double whammy of both high unemployment and high inflation. Way worse than what we're having now for those who worry about inflation and rightly do so today. Inflation was really soaring. Unemployment was really soaring. This phenomenon called stagflation, and retail really suffered by and large. Business really suffered. But Sam Walton's model, because of the low prices, because of the locations he was in, proved to be counter-cyclical, and Walmart was able to grow when others were really struggling.
In 1971, Sam Walton put into place a profit-sharing plan. How important was that to the company culture? What did it mean for employees?
It was huge. So Sam Walton, always paid, and retail always paid, but Sam Walton in particular always kept his wages for his hourly workers down as low as possible. Again, this was a huge part of the formula for having low prices for his customers. And, he himself acknowledged in his autobiography that he could be chintzy, was his word, with his frontline workers. But he did offer profit sharing. And particularly for early employees, the company was relatively, small then. It didn't have, 1 million plus workers or nearly 2 million workers in the U.S. It was much, much smaller. And so, like a lot of companies, if you kind of got in early and it was a stock that was growing well, you could, invest your money in Walmart stock as part of this profit sharing plan, and people did quite well. There was also just a straight cash profit formula that allowed you to share in profit, and it made the wages for people who otherwise would have really been struggling more tolerable. And it also really gave them a kind of an ownership mentality in the business, so it was definitely helpful.
How important is Bentonville, Arkansas, to Walmart's culture?
I think it's quite important. We've seen lots of companies move corporate headquarters over the years, right? And, Boeing, right? Which seemed to have such deep roots in a place like Seattle and then is no longer there. I really can't imagine Walmart not being in Bentonville. Again, it's so much in its DNA, this smaller town ethos that was really what Sam Walton was all about, and really a succession of CEOs have been all about. They've I think to a person have had more of a rural background, more of a small town America heartland background, and it's very woven into their DNA.
By the time Sam Walton retired, end of the 1980s, you report that Walmart had 1,400 stores, 120 Sam's Clubs, which are the membership clubs, and 275,000 employees. Next two CEOs were David Glass, who served for 12 years, Lee Scott, who was an insider since the early days, accelerated the growth, but you also tell us that along with accelerated growth came lots of criticism. What were the major critiques of Walmart?
Yeah, so right, all of those companies, all those CEOs, kind of kept their foot on the company's gas pedal, and the growth just continued and continued and continued until Walmart was by revenue the biggest company in America. It would eventually, by number of employees, be the biggest company in America. There are lots of reasons, as the giant, and I think again, even though Walmart is bigger, Amazon is feeling some of this, where, folks start to look at what was once a kind of the American dream story, a success story, and they start to look at it more with a critical eye. I think we as a society love to do that, right? We kind of build something up and then we love to tear it down. So I think that's part of what was going on, was just the sheer size of Walmart. Folks were looking at it in a different light and coming after it. And there's always been this idea in called the curse of bigness in business, right? That companies that get too big have too much power, an inordinate amount of power. And so folks were looking at them differently. But things also changed after Sam Walton, passed away. And I, don't want to over mythologize when he was there, but the bigger, Walmart got, the harder it was to have this sort of, small town feel for its employees. Suddenly, there are thousands and thousands of stores to manage. It used to be Sam Walton really knew his employees' names and would drop in all the time and see them and really knew them. Doug McMillon still travels the stores to this day, the current CEO. But it's obviously really different when you have, over 1.5 million frontline workers. You just can't know folks the way you did. And so workers started to feel like they were being treated differently. In time, the profit sharing also disappeared. And so kind of the special things about Walmart, its camaraderie, this feeling of, this charismatic character, Sam Walton, who would go around and make them feel like part of the Walmart family, that was gone. Profit sharing was gone. And the things that were left were just low wages and an increasingly just kind of big, in some ways, maybe bureaucratic place to work. And folks were really struggling just on those wages. They had a really hard time keeping up. And so there was a lot of criticism from organized labor, from unions, about how workers were being treated. There was also a lot of criticism about Walmart crowding out mom and pop local businesses in communities. And we can get into that, whether that's, how much there is to that or not is to that. But that was definitely the perception that Walmart was driving Main Street businesses out. And certainly if, you can argue about what the economics of that look like, whether that's good for a community or not, and there are mixed economic studies on all of that. It certainly changes the aesthetic of local communities. And Walmart's not the only big box retailer to do that, but we know that local communities have changed their character in many ways over the years as the Walmarts of the world have moved in. And then there was this notion of, again, kind of pushing hard on their suppliers and pushing so hard that many were forced to move operations overseas so that they could keep their own labor costs down and supply Walmart with cheaper goods.
At what point in Walmart's trajectory did Amazon become a real competitive force, and what impact did it have on Walmart operations?
Yeah, I mean, as Amazon has grown over the years, and it was certainly on Lee Scott's radar before Doug McMillon became CEO in 2014. As Amazon grew and grew, Walmart certainly was paying attention. First of all, I would say Walmart, like any smart company, successful company, pays attention to all its competitors. But by the time Doug McMillon came in 2014 as CEO, he definitely felt like Walmart wasn't paying enough attention to Amazon. And in fact, he had his entire executive team read this book by Brad Stone, The Everything Store, about Jeff Bezos and Amazon, and really wanted to focus their attention. I think it's fair to say that Amazon hangs over Walmart and probably many of the, if not most of the business decisions that it makes. It's in the context of these two giants slugging it out.
So let's go back to the Lee Scott CEO period. He came in about what time? Do you know when he started?
Lee Scott, I'm trying to remember the year he started. I think, the big moment for him and for Walmart was really Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And, that's a moment in the company's history. It's been a bit mythologized, as many of these corporate stories can be inside. But there's a lot of truth to it. Some of your viewers may remember that after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, Walmart really did some incredible things. It used its size, it used its logistics network, it's used its ability to move goods around, to go into the devastated areas, particularly around New Orleans, and where the federal government, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, couldn't get goods in and were really stymied. Walmart was able to deliver food and water and other crucial supplies, medicines and other things. And really, Walmart became, a hero in that narrative. And Lee Scott seized on that and said, hey, there's something here. We can use Walmart's size to do good in the world. What if we tried to do that every day?
You say that Lee Scott then prepared for a very large corporate framing speech in October of 2005, kind of resetting the narrative about Walmart. What were his messages?
Yeah, it was really that key question, right? We've been criticized for our bigness, for our size, for all the reasons that we just talked about. And he said, suppose we could turn that on its head. Hurricane Katrina was a moment that, I'm extremely proud of as CEO. I know you all are proud of. We were able to help these devastated communities. How could we use our size? Suppose we used our size, our scale, every day to make the world better. And we turn this idea of bigness around. And he called for, first of all, and he was already moving down this track as the CEO, Walmart using its size to help with the environment and sustainability, to make the company more sustainable, to change its environmental practices, to cut its carbon footprint, to do other things that would help make Walmart a greener company. And that was a place that he spoke a lot about in the speech, and again was already kind of on that trajectory early on with the company, and wanted to accelerate those efforts. He did talk a little bit about wages. He talked about healthcare, providing lower health premiums to its workers, So having, more affordable health coverage for its workers. And he did talk about wages, but more the need to look at the federal minimum wage and take a look at that and see if that should move upward. But really, the main focus was around environmental policy at that time.
At the same time that Lee Scott was reframing or hoped to reframe Walmart, labor unions were ramping up their efforts. Yeah. So which labor unions were involved and what kind of campaigns did they wage?
Yeah, there were two unions that really took on Walmart, and they're fascinating campaigns. So one was the Service Employees International Union, the SEIU, then led by Andy Stern, and the Food and Commercial Workers Union, then led by Joe Hansen. And two, giant unions. In the case of the food and commercial workers, they really hoped to organize Walmart, and they had for years been trying unsuccessfully to organize Walmart. And that is, just to be super clear, they wanted, much like is going on at Starbucks now and Amazon now, they were trying to have workers, sign a union card and then represent those workers through collective bargaining in contract talks with with Walmart. That was their hope and vision and what they were trying to achieve. The Service Employees Union, a little bit different. They wouldn't represent Walmart workers, but Andy Stern saw Walmart, because of its size, as kind of the way to say corporate America is broken. Corporate America is doing all kinds of things that harm working folks, and their wages are inadequate. Their health care coverage is inadequate. They are really, oppressing working folks. And he saw Walmart as kind of a target and went after them. And so both unions kind of launched these giant campaigns simultaneously, and really, they were among the first giant campaigns that looked at a corporation like a political candidate, and they really tried to tear Walmart down in the public eye.
So you quote Lee Scott in your book saying that the union's barrage was, quote, one of the most sophisticated, expensive corporate campaigns ever waged. How did Walmart respond?
Yeah, so facts, definitely on that. And yeah, just incredible. So Walmart Watch was the Service Employees Union campaign, and Wake Up Walmart was the Food and Commercial Workers campaign. They were incredibly creative. They ran ads. They recruited people online, much like voters get recruited online to back a candidate. To go after Walmart in different ways. The Food and Commercial Workers Union launched this big bus tour where they went across the country and almost, held political style rallies, often with politicians, like-minded politicians, showing up to make speeches and condemn Walmart. Really all kinds of creative, things that they did to keep Walmart in the public eye and give it a black eye. And the company responded, I think for a while they just tried to keep their heads down and hope it would go away. It didn't. And so they began their own sort of counter campaign, and they hired a gentleman from Edelman, the public relations firm, who had been working with the company, to come inside and kind of lead a counteroffensive, a gentleman by the name of Leslie Dock.
Also working with, this was an interesting name, Mike Deaver, who people in the audience will remember as the communications guru during the Reagan years. So what kind of response did they come up with to the union's efforts?
Yeah, so they created a kind of a war room. They came up with their own counter messaging, their own counter ad campaigns to say, look at all the good that Walmart does in the world. This is how Walmart saves consumers money. That's a form of freedom. They really ran their own counter campaign. So it really became almost like a political campaign with folks on two sides.
Was there any movement on compensation, which was one of the goals of the unions?
No, not really. Walmart, look, has always raised wages over the years. Obviously, wages are higher than when Sam Walton was there, but that's because, the market has bid up wages over time and, to keep up with the cost of living and other things. And in many cases, even though the federal minimum wage hasn't been raised, in an awfully long time, you have state and local minimum wage ordinances that have, forced Walmart in particular markets to raise its wages. So it's not like wages have stayed completely flat. They're obviously higher. But no, Walmart never, raised wages, as it would eventually do in 2015. So, during this whole time, wages were not raised.
Did it ever come to a vote, the organizing efforts? Did they manage to successfully coalesce anywhere?
No, not really. Walmart has always been able to beat back organized labor. In fact, a lot of the tactics that you see now, some legal, some I suspect will be deemed illegal, that places like Amazon and Starbucks companies are doing to hold down unionization efforts. Walmart really wrote the playbook on all those things. So there's never really been a substantial threat to unionize Walmart, despite great efforts by the food and commercial workers and some others, but particularly the food and commercial workers over a long period of time. They could never get in. There was one store where a few meat cutters in Texas organized, and Walmart quickly found a way to make that go away. And so, no, there's really never been a union threat at Walmart.
You report that the data at the time showed that the majority of employees were pretty happy with Walmart, and you note that when you did research for your book, you found much, or in later years, found much the same thing. So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things going on. So first of all, what I say and what others have found is that it's a mixed bag. And so I think it is important to note that there are many, many workers who are happy with their jobs at Walmart, are satisfied with, the living that they make. And many have been there for a long time. But it's also true that, like many retailers, and particularly, this has gone down some, but particularly before Doug McMillon came in as CEO, turnover was incredibly high, really a sign that people are not happy. They're leaving in droves and very quickly turning out the door. And many workers are struggling and really just trying to make ends meet and can't make ends meet on a Walmart wage. And so it is really a mixed bag. When you have more than 1.5 million frontline workers, as I say in the book, when people say, are Walmart workers happy? It's like, I don't know, plunging into a city with 1.5 million people and saying, do you like to live here? Well, who are you talking to? What neighborhood are they in? Right? Well, I mean, it's so many people that, you find folks who are satisfied and you find folks who are really not satisfied. And many of those who are not satisfied are not there very long even to be surveyed. They're out the door.
One of the seemingly unusual outcomes of Andy Stern and the SEIU was an announcement by Andy Stern in 2007. We've got a bit of video on this. Let's watch.
Today I stood on the stage with leaders of American business, civic organizations, a former senator, to say it's time for every American to have quality, affordable health care. I stood with Lee Scott, the CEO of Walmart, a moment I never would have expected would have happened in my life, along with business leaders from Intel and Kelly Service and AT&T, and another union leader from CWA. We stood together for a very simple reason. We share a common value and belief that by 2012, every man, woman, and child in America needs to have quality, affordable health care. And the fact that we are such a diverse group of people, representing so many different points of view, and at times people who just have not agreed, the fact that we come together, I think, is the power of our new coalition.
Seems like strange bedfellows, SEIU and Walmart. What happened?
Yeah, strange is an understatement, right? So as Walmart began to, make these changes around the environment and environmental practices, One of the things that Lee Scott was really good at was actually listening to his critics and being open to at least have some kind of dialogue. And he certainly did it on the environment. The company brought in, the Environmental Defense Fund and, other environmental organizations, Conservation International and others that, normally would have had nothing to do with Walmart in the past. But he created channels that he could, have dialogue with them, listen to them, and it led to many changes in Walmart's environmental practices. And Walmart is seen to this day, and they're far from perfect, and I detail this in the book, but they are seen as an environmental leader, certainly among retailers and really among most, large companies, leading the way in terms of sustainability, at least as far as the corporate community will go on those kinds of issues. And again, it all started under Lee Scott, and it started with him listening to critics. They started to listen to some others as well, even on employment practices, although Lee Scott, again, didn't raise wages and nothing much really changed. He began to listen to some folks who, again, normally wouldn't have been in kind of Walmart's orbit, even around labor practices. One of the groups that Lee Scott had an open dialogue with was the Interfaith Committee for Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, a group of religious orders and others. So this is sort of the some of the nuns who would show up and get in Lee Scott's ear about the way Walmart was treating workers, and he would engage in that dialogue. He also through some back channel connections, began a dialogue around healthcare, which was really, healthcare costs were really hurting Walmart. He began kind of a backdoor dialogue with Andy Stern and the Service Employees Union on healthcare. What I detail in the book is those talks ended up actually extending into some other areas, including wages and other labor practices. Really fascinating kind of backdoor negotiations. Those didn't end up going anywhere, but on healthcare, Walmart and the Service Employees Union and some others, as the clip showed, were able to come together. And effectively, they called for universal healthcare coverage. And Walmart ended up being one of the few large companies to back an employer mandate to make sure that folks were insured.
Just a little over 20 minutes left in our conversation with Rick Wartzman. His book is Still Broke, Walmart's Remarkable Transformation and the Limits of Socially Conscious Capitalism. So when they were endorsing health care, I wanted to use that as a point to ask you about Walmart's relationship with national politicians. So did they have vocal critics, vocal supporters on the national scene?
Both, I would say. Certainly lots of, critics over the years, particularly, not surprisingly, on the Democratic side of the aisle. Again, really, I think largely over time around wage policy. Walmart was, again, up until, 2015 when it raised wages. And again, my book is really a story of how and why it came to do that and what it says. Walmart, before that was paying the average starting wage before it made this change was $7.65 an hour. That was the average starting wage. The minimum wage, federal minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. So they were barely over minimum wage. And, lots of criticism. When you pay that little, you end up with workers on Medicaid and food stamps and other forms of public assistance. And, that feels wrong to a lot of people, including me. And they've certainly been criticized for that by many folks on the Democratic side of the aisle.
So would it be fair to say that if employees of any large company have to use Medicaid and food stamps, that in fact the larger public is subsidizing the low wages of these corporations?
I think that is a fair statement for sure.
Let me play one clip. I wanted to ask you, we're staying on the national political scene because they got involved in the healthcare debate. But this was a dynamic of the Clinton administration, but at the same time, the Clintons were Arkansas-based and Walmart was the largest employer in their state. So What was the relationship between the Clintons and Walmart?
Well, Hillary Clinton served on Walmart's board. And I mean, super interesting by all accounts. And I did not interview her. My book isn't focused on that period, but by everything that, I've read and folks who knew her, who I did talk to, and her role there, she did push Walmart on environmental policy. She was able to push them on, gender equity and other things, having more, women in executive roles. And she made change where she could. At the same time, as a presidential candidate, she ran away from Walmart and really said, this isn't a company that stands for anything that I currently stand for.
Just to demonstrate that the criticism continues in more recent times, we have a clip of Bernie Sanders. This is from 2019.
The Walton family, which is the wealthiest family in America, worth about $175 billion. One might think that a family worth $175 billion would be able to pay its employees a living wage. And yet, as you all know, the starting wage at Walmart now is $11 an hour. And people cannot make it on $11 an hour. You can't pay rent. You can't get health care. You can't feed your kids or put gas in the car on $11 an hour.
Rick Wartzman, did Walmart executives find themselves in Capitol Hill testifying about any of this over the years?
They've certainly, talked about the minimum wage, and Doug McMillon has said that the federal minimum wage should go up. He's talked about $15 an hour as a standard, as a more appropriate standard, but as then, we'll add the caveat that we need to be careful about raising it too much for small business, and maybe there should be geographical differences that, $15 an hour is, about $30,000 a year for a full-time 40-hour-a-week hourly worker. I don't know anywhere in the country where $30,000 a year is a lot of money or really even a living wage. So, I have a very different view of that. But yeah, they have certainly talked about the need for the federal minimum wage to move higher. I think what's really interesting about what Bernie Sanders was saying is this is in 2019, right? So this is after Walmart had already made a lot of change. And again, the story that I tell is really centered on how, when Doug McMillon came in as CEO in 2014, he and his team knew that things were broken in terms of the pay for its hourly workers. And there were lots of problems because pay had just been held down for so long. As I said, turnover was just rampant, right? Super high. There's a story of one of Doug's senior executives going into a store, somewhere in the South, and the manager telling her that turnover was 400%. So, every person you're looking at, there's, 4 people in that job over the course of a year. It's just in one job. So turnover was running rampant. Others told me across the board it was as high as 200%. Retail has high turnover, but not that high. So low pay, and not great working conditions were really causing problems for Walmart from a public relations standpoint, but also just from a business standpoint. And so after this decade of pressure from the unions, from other labor activists, there was an organization that spun out of the food and commercial workers called Our Walmart, now United for Respect. It really has kept a lot of pressure on the company and pushed them to raise wages. The interfaith community, as I described, keeping pressure on politicians like Bernie Sanders. All of this happened. And so Walmart finally did go in and raise wages. And again, lots of it because of business reasons. Their sales were flagging. Turnover was so high. Customer service was suffering. Customers were not shopping as much at Walmart. Same store sales were on the decline. Doug McMillon knew he had to do something to fix things. He had to invest in his workers as never before. And Walmart did. And so in 2015, they began this two-step wage increase. So their starting pay went from, as I said, an average of $7.65 an hour to $9 and then to $10 in this kind of two-step process. They also invested more in training. They tried to improve scheduling for their workers. And today, under Doug's leadership, they have more full-time employees and fewer part-time employees than they did. That's good for people, more hours, more stability. All of that is to the good. But what Bernie Sanders is really pointing to, and he's not wrong, is that even after all of those things, and I think their hearts are in the right place, their minds are in the right place, they've made this turn, Walmart is investing as never before in its people, it's still lacking. It's still broke. The system's still broke. People are still broke. They're still not making enough. Even after all of the investments, the average Walmart worker is still making less than $29,000 a year. And again, to me, that is not a living wage, and it really doesn't matter where you live.
Let's hear from Doug McMillon, get his voice and perspective on the record here. This is June of 2012, which is before he took over as CEO, but he had been with the company for a long time, and it was then president and CEO of Walmart International. Let's listen.
Walmart went through a transition a few years ago. We believed in the very beginning, as you would expect, that customers and associates were two key stakeholders. Did we care about shareholders? Sure, any business cares about shareholders, but our philosophy was if you focus on associates and they're happy and they do a good job and they have opportunities, they'll take good care of customers, and if customers are happy, your business grows. Sounds pretty simple. But when we became big, whenever that was, we didn't always get the memo on the moment that occurred, but when we became big, societal expectations were higher than what I just described. So we needed help. So starting to listen more to people like Dr. Gale and others to say, you need to think differently about the environment, you need to think differently about social issues, has led us to a point where we are today. We're still maturing, but we have a different point of view and perspective than we had before.
Rick Wartzman, that 2015 board meeting where they approved the first ever across-the-board pay raise for their workers, how did Wall Street respond?
Not well. I mean, and this really shows the pressure that companies, corporate America is under. And remember, this is a company where, the Walton family owns, half or, about half of the shares. And so in some ways, Walmart probably has more latitude, assuming the Waltons are on board, and they were in this case, to raise pay, than other companies, which, don't have such a giant shareholder. And those companies may be under even more pressure than Walmart was. But yeah, they raised pay, and Walmart, it actually took some months for kind of the full story of what the cost of that, or the investment, what the investment amount would be, and what that would do over a period of time to earnings, how that would tamp down the company's profits for a while, until they saw a return on that investment. And again, it takes some time. Turnover goes down. Your workers, leave more satisfied customers because they know what they're doing better, because they're not out the door, because they're getting paid more. And all of those things ultimately can lead to growth, higher sales, higher profits, but it takes time. And when Wall Street, heard about the size of the investment, it clobbered the stock. And, Walmart, saw a lot of market cap go poof in one day.
So we have about 10 minutes left. Let's get to the conclusions that you drew from all of this work and research on Walmart and the overall retail sector in the United States, their competitors, et cetera. You write that your view of the role of government changed during your 2-year Walmart project. How so?
Yeah, so I've always been a what I'd call a both-and person on this issue, which is to say, we need, companies to treat their workers well, to pay a living wage, to really be the primary actors had been my view, and to make change, and that the government, provided a safety net, set basic guardrails, and that was its role, but it was really the corporate sector, which I thought really needed to kind of take the lead in solving kind of these big societal issues. And I look at, and I call it a wage crisis that we have in America, that it was up to corporate America to turn that around. And what, my peek into Walmart really showed me was that this is a company that has really made a good faith effort in its own context and has done a lot. But again, at the end of the day, the average Walmart worker is still making less than $29,000 a year. That is not a living wage. And what it showed me is that corporate America, left on its own, will never move far enough or fast enough to reverse this wage crisis that we have in this country, just with so many working people getting up, working hard, and not being able to make ends meet. And that what we really need is a government-mandated living wage. And I call for $20 an hour in the book, and we can talk about why that is. Let me give you two numbers just to kind of illustrate what I'm saying. So Walmart, from 2015, when they made this first wage increase, up through the end of last year, they had invested about $5 to $6 billion, billion with a B, in higher wages, better benefits, worker training, better scheduling, more full-time workers, and so on in its workforce. Really, that's a big investment. It's serious money, and it speaks to, this is real. Walmart's transformation is remarkable and real, and I applaud them for that. At the same time, you compare that $5 to $6 billion to they bought back $43 billion worth of their stock over that same period. Stock buybacks are really a reward to shareholders, and so, companies like Walmart can talk about stakeholder capitalism and moving away from a model of shareholder primacy, putting shareholders first. But if you follow the money, shareholders are still put first. And, I just don't think companies are ever going to move far enough, fast enough on their own to fix this wage crisis that Walmart and many other companies have, put our society in over the last 50 years.
Right now, amongst American public, inflation is the single number one worry for individuals. Is not what you're suggesting inflationary?
Well, it could be in the sense that I know people worry about a wage price spiral, but right now wages are not keeping up with prices, and so again, we have a crisis, and I think we really need to see it as a crisis. There are somewhere between, by all the studies, by my own research, 25 to 40% of the U.S. labor force. So you're talking 40 to 65 million working people who get up, go to work every day, and then, not every week, not necessarily every month, but really struggle to make ends meet. And for that population, it is not untypical to have to make really terrible trade-offs between, one thing goes wrong in your life, a broken carburetor, a kid home from school and you don't have childcare that you can afford, and then you can't show up for work and you're suddenly in a crisis. It is not uncommon for that group to have to make trade-offs between food and medicine and rent. That's terrible. I think, we can all see what it's done to our society, politically, socially. It is tearing at the fabric of our society. Those of us who are privileged and fortunate enough to not struggle in those ways, we rely on this army of low-paid workers to provide services for us, to often take care of us when we're sick, to take care of our kids, to serve us in so many ways. And we're not, companies aren't paying them enough to live on. I think we need to really fix that problem. $20 an hour may sound radical, but I think what is radical is that we live in a country where tens of millions of people live that way.
Let me go back to your subtitle again, Walmart's Remarkable Transformation, which you spent a lot of time detailing the many changes that they made to the company and its overall relationship with its workers and with the public. And the second half of your subtitle, The Limits of Socially Conscious Capitalism. So how did Walmart respond when they heard your book and heard the argument that you think they should lead the way in this $20 an hour wage increase?
Yeah, so again, I would love to see them lead the way. I think as the market leader, they could do a lot by continuing to raise wages more aggressively, and I think they should, and I think they can afford to do so. But again, the kind of full-throated cry at the end of the book is for a government-mandated living wage. I think that, companies across the board need to pay this. I do say, look, smaller businesses, maybe there needs to be a phase-in. There can be well-designed ways to do this kind of public policy. I don't have any problem with a sub-minimum wage for teenage workers getting their first work experience, that kind of thing. But we really need a living wage in this country. Walmart does not like the title. I know that of the book. But I told them going in, look, I was going to call it as I see it. I do think, the book is not a screed. It's not an anti-Walmart book. It is nuanced. It really takes a look at all the good that they've done and applauds them for it. And at the end of the day, it says it falls short, and our system falls short, and we need to fix those things.
What is the political viability of your proposal?
In the current environment, zero, right? I mean, we know Washington can't get things done. There have been calls to raise the minimum wage not to nearly $20 an hour, on the table for a long time, right? We've been stuck since 2009 at $7.25 an hour in terms of the federal minimum wage. And so, not terribly realistic, but I also don't think it's realistic to expect corporate America to fix this. I think it's up to us to elect people who will, represent the interests of ourselves, but, society, and take care of working people who, again, give us so much, work so hard. And, to me, it is really a travesty when in the richest nation on earth, you have people who get up, go to work, and have to make those painful choices that I described. Something's broken.
Once again, the book title, Still Broke, Walmart's Remarkable Transformation and the Limits of Socially Conscious Capitalism. Rick Wartzman, thank you so much for spending an hour with C-SPAN.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to C-SPAN's Q&A, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're there, please take a minute to rate and review us. You can also send us an email about Q&A at podcasts@c-span.org. Send me your questions, your comments, or ideas. Your feedback is welcome.